Hey folks, welcome to the show. I am incredibly excited to introduce you all to Alexander Love. If you are not aware or have not met him already, I experience Alexander as a total treasure and have thoroughly enjoyed meeting him and getting to hang out together over the last year, I want to say. Um, in this moment, it is July 19th, 2023. So yeah, I imagine it's been sometime in the last year we connected, but yeah, there's I feel Alexander and I just finished recording a few minutes ago, and I feel incredibly lucky to get to share this recording and conversation with you all. We we both agreed we covered a lot of ground in the time we spent together and traversed a lot of different terrains and territories in consciousness. And we have a question of whether or not this is landing and useful and helpful, and what we could have gotten more technical on and dove into a bit more versus yeah, what's just landing and making sense. So as always, there's an invitation to really relax into and sink into the field that Alexander and I are hanging out in. There's an invitation for you to allow yourself to rest and to decompress and to unburden and unwind and to be resourced and nourished and mm, rejuvenated by the field we're hanging out in. Feel free to um, feel free to listen to this recording and to take in this recording in whatever way feels best for you. Um, and I imagine there are ways you could really drop into a deep state of relaxation, just lying down and closing your eyes and taking in the recording if that feels supportive. So yeah, I'm happy to have you here. It's feels a fitting title to call this episode A Journey into Wholeness. So without further ado, here's Alexander Love and our call. Thanks so much for being here. Enjoy. Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for being available for this.
Of course. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm I feel very energized being here with you.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to share to land or feel more fully here?
Well, I don't think so. Yeah, no. I feel here.
Same. So maybe we'll just get started.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Well, hey, Alexander, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I'm opening up into receptivity for a question to
Hmm.
come in to ask you in this moment. Is there anything you're showing up with that would feel juicy to explore together?
I mean, it's a great question. It's hard because I've been feverishly writing a book. It's hard for me to not be in that territory. We don't need to go in that direction, but it's rare that I'm not somehow in relationship with that territory. Um, so anytime, if since you're asking what's alive, that's always alive,
Hmm.
and we don't need to automatically go that direction.
I'm curious, is there a sentence in your book that you feel like folks have just got to hear?
It's like almost a 700-page book. So there's probably lots of sentences that I think that folks should need to hear. But you know, at the essence of it, it's the book is an adventure, and it's an adventure in wholeness. And it's an invitation that we begin to look at how we're making sense of the developmental process in a new way that takes us a little bit further away from perceiving development as an individual process that takes place upon stairs, but rather there's an individual and collective dimension to it, but that in fact the growing up process is the filling out of the human whole. So rather than climbing upstairs, it's a filling. And so it leads into a territory of, as we're listening to how each other are making meaning, it's listening more to the fullness of all the developmental features that are expressing themselves at once. If somebody has context awareness, for example, they're also using the sensing processes that they learned as a baby. When someone's sitting in a circle with others and they are wanting to see each other and be seen by one another in a more subtle way, they're still utilizing what they learned when they developed capacities for friendship. And that these whole friendship as like a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old. And so all of these things are alive together and living together, and they're interdependent as a way the cosmos is growing up. So I didn't really give you a sentence, but that's kind of the insubstantial essence,
The
part of the.
the insubstantial essence.
Well, yeah, what I mean is I'm not offering details, it's like,
Mm,
um,
mm.
that's part of the essence of what the book is trying to invite. As well as beginning to look at wholeness, we start looking at gesture, because the continuity, Jeremy Johnson talks about the continuity fold. And the continuity fold is like, if you just imagine a line that's sort of going upwards and curving and then coming downwards and then curving back upwards and then curving back downwards. If you zoom in on that you don't see the curves, it just looks like separate lines. But if you zoom out, it's one line that is in an unfolding gesture. And so there's an invitation to kind of move into a more process oriented. And by process, I mean recognition that we're verbs. I'm not against nouns. We can certainly orient to ourselves as things, and there's value in doing that. It's very stabilizing. To believe that I'm going to wake up tomorrow fundamentally the same way I'm going to sleep, there's something very soothing about that recognition. And of course, there's certain ways in which we need that kind of stability in some ways to remain what we might consider sane. But we could also look at nouns as captured verbs, and that we can kind of tilt it a little bit and sense into how we're an unfolding process together, not just individually. That we're an unfolding, we're a continuity stream, a set of gestures. We're not a stick, in the stream, but we're actually the curls in the stream. And that changes the relationship that, to what we are and what it means to be alive and stuff like that.
There feels to me like an opportunity to make it an explicit invitation for our connection today to be a journey in wholeness.
I love it. And when I hear you say I want to include our listeners in that, which I know
Please.
you do too, but I want to just make that explicit, that for everyone listening, um, I know both Forrest and I are less interested in talking about things and more interested in talking from things, um, which is an invitation for all of us to journey along together in a process of discovery. There may be new ideas, but the new ideas, what would it mean to live them in the moment and experience them together?
I'm clapping. It's beautifully said. And in service of where we're speaking from, um, I feel compelled to invite you to share what you mean when you say wholeness.
Well, I think first I would say that, I mean, I guess you are asking what I mean by wholeness. I was going to say, um, there's a lot of valid ways of embracing wholeness that are going to show up in different humans in different ways. And, wholeness is something that is it's a vast topic, but I guess for me, um, to begin with, I would say that wholeness leaves nothing behind. And it's important, I think, to make this distinction, because a lot of times when we talk about wholeness, there's a sort of an implicit disregard for separation. Oh, I want to feel more whole. And if we look at that deeply, there's an implication that what that means is I want to feel less separate, which is a beautiful thing to want, especially if our heart is broken, not fundamentally broken, but feels in agony, is what I mean. Um, and yet, to me, wholeness is actually large enough to include separation. It's large enough to include division. It's large enough to include all the dimensions in the cosmos, in ourselves, that are experiencing uh, a, a cleave, a wedge in between. Wholeness would have to include that too. Otherwise, it wouldn't be wholeness.
There's some kind of phrase forming over here, like there's nothing wholeness is not, or there's nothing that's not in wholeness.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what is it? What kind of patterns or mm, distinctions do you notice of when you're coming from wholeness as opposed to maybe when you're coming from, I don't know what word you'd use, fragmentation or part or,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I love the question. So what I'm hearing is, how would we frame this in a way relating to our sort of more subtle dimensions of self. And um, when we're looking at wholeness, it has very noticeable features. That doesn't mean that we're even necessarily having a deeply profound state experience, because we can see the expression of wholeness in a lot of human beings. That doesn't mean that they are having some sort of unity experience. And so I want to be really clear about wholeness can be quite simple. And some of its features can be curiosity, authentic curiosity, um, interest, the desire to just lean in and explore. I mean, you can see this with a 5-year-old, right? We can see when, let's say one 5-year-old is dejected and kind of forlorn in a corner, kind of shut down. We would say that that's when there's a part that's taken over, or parts that have taken over. But then we see another child who is just interested. Their mind is open, and they're in a place of wonder. That's an expression of wholeness. wholeness also, you know, it has access to love. And by love, I mean something deeper than like, oh, I love you until I hate you. Like it's a little bit beyond the regular kinds of love. Um, very often compassion is there. And it's not that a 5-year-old's going to say, I'm feeling compassionate. So like we have to, you know, also include that what any word I'm saying means will grow up. But, you know, maybe with a young child, we might see it as genuine kindness. You know, we may not call it compassion per se, but kindness. And another way to say it, I'm giving some specific examples, but another way to say this is that wholeness is the sea of virtue. And there's a pluripotency, which what I mean by that is like it's like stem cells. Stem cells, if people aren't familiar, these are cells that can become any kind of specific differentiated cell, but they don't start that way. They start out as a cell that is pluripotent. It has the capacity to become many different forms once it differentiates. In the same way, wholeness is like a sea of virtue. And so I'm using words like wonder and curiosity and love and genuine kindness and all those kinds of things. But it's really, in a way, infinite, in that wholeness can become whatever virtue is needed in any context dependent situation. Maybe in one situation, it looks like courage. In another situation, it looks like playfulness. Another situation, it looks like quiet stillness. So that's some dimensions of wholeness. And then when a part takes over, the part itself is also part of wholeness, but it doesn't remember. And so it expresses itself with a more limited perspective, a limited experience of what the world is, and a more constrained way in which it wants to move in relationship to its perspective and the world that it sees. So, for example, maybe there's a part that is holding anger, and it has the perspective that everyone is trying to block me whenever I'm trying to succeed. So we have a perspective that has some narratives, some stories in it. And then it's going to look out into the world and it's going to see a world that's in an expression of its perspective. It's going to see an angry world. It's going to see a world filled with blockades. And then it's going to have an impulse to move in certain ways in relationship to that, whether it's to hit the world or hide from the world. And so whatever that, you know, however that those configurations might show up, we have this part that forgets its wholeness. And then if it takes over, that's the key here. If it takes over wholeness, then we get fused with it. And now we see the world as the part rather than seeing the world from the whole that includes fragmentation, because we all have fragmentation inside of us.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so how does wholeness see?
Well, again, it's not one way, right? It's going to depend on how wholeness see. I would add to the question, how does wholeness see through a myriad of perspectives?
Mm.
And then we could sort of take on any number of those perspectives. I mean, again, an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, how does wholeness see through the eyes and heart of a 10-year-old? You know, it may be kindness in one's collective. And like I see in my daughter's class, when she was in, you know, 7th grade, 8th grade, the amount of mutual support. So if one kid was feeling insecure about their artistic abilities or about their ability to do anything in general, what I'd often see, and of course this was curated by intentional teachers that are holding the collective in very specific, intentional ways. But you'd see these children just come to each other's, support, where one kid's crying and they're like, oh no, you're amazing, and you're a beautiful human being, and like, let's do it together. Why don't we help each other? And so we can see wholeness through the eyes of wholeness, within that age group. It may look like that. Wholeness, in a maybe in a group of people that are sitting in circles and wanting to see and be seen, more subtly. Wholeness is like, I think, there's a book, about from the IFS, internal family systems tradition, called like There Are No Bad Parts. So that's that kind of invitation of, wholeness is, in that context, any part of the self showing up inside of me and inside of you is welcomed, and there's an invitation to turn towards, to lean into, to get to know, to be closer with. And then, of course, as a human being grows up, the reality of what they see, the world that they see, keeps getting bigger. So then that means that the eyes of wholeness would have to naturally get bigger to accommodate whatever else starts to bloom, you could say, in consciousness.
There's an experience happening over here of eyes sort of opening and blinking, but also changing in size in real time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So if we're able to, if some human beings will, as they make meaning and look out into the world, they'll start to see, oh, everybody everybody has their own world that they're arising in. It's like all these little world bubbles. And so that's different than like, oh, you have parts of the self and I have parts of the self. It kind of gets a little bigger now. There's like, these world bubbles that are all over the place, and they're all sort of, creating their own realities. And so then wholeness would have to accommodate that too, that every world space and its perspective that's arising with it, and in union with it, all of that would also have to be included. So the thing is that wholeness gets as big as we get, and so the eyes of its perspective will exponentially widen or narrow, depending on how we're making sense of things.
And as you're saying that, there's an awareness too of the wholeness in the relationship between all these different world bubbles. Like not just that they're all isolated, not that they're all isolated world bubbles, but the interconnectedness of all the bubbles and how they're influencing and impacting each other.
Absolutely. And I think, we see this in some spiritual traditions. We'll kind of use the word interdependency, and that's what I hear you speaking to. And another word that I really love is symbiosis. So some of us, if you've read any books by Ken Wilber, I mean, I know some of you listeners maybe have, maybe haven't, but he'll, or you've studied Maturana, they'll use this word autopoiesis, which is like a self-becoming, a self-replicating. But then Donna Haraway, I don't think she made up the word, but I think it kind of was brought back into the social field in some of her work, symbiosis, which I like, because if you misspell it, well, so symbiosis means becoming with. And what I was going to say is, what I like is that if you misspell it and you spell it as like sympoetic, it's like making poetry together, right? And so, because it's an impossible word to spell for me as a recovering dyslexic human being, it's an impossible word to spell. And so sometimes, you know, writing the word sympoetic, it would come out as poetry rather than the right way you're supposed to do it. And so the idea with sympoesis is that we're becoming with each other and we're becoming with the world. Um, it's very common for human beings, I think, to be very individually focused and or human focused. And yet, you know, as we're on this call, we're both wearing shirts. You know, we both have a laptop. These are non this is part of the non-human world. Not only are our shirts part of the non-human world, but inside of them, there's you know, subatomic particles that have been existing for quite a long time. There's the life, the living like whatever beings, living beings became shirts. And then there's the human ingenuity and the human labor that goes into creating these shirts. And so even with simply looking at a shirt in the context of our conversation, we're so very deeply becoming with a world.
Mm.
And so it brings us into sort of coming back to what you were saying that brought this up for me. There's such a profound degree of interconnectivity between any individuals in so many ways that goes far beyond just even human interconnectivity, but that we are literally, I mean, we're only having this conversation because of hundreds of thousands of years of human beings exploring language, how to articulate the ineffable. And even in that, we're connected to, you know, so much of human history um, and so on.
So you mentioned, is it symbiosis? Am I saying that right?
I say it's sympoesis,
Symbiosis.
like
Okay.
autopoiesis, but with a sim, and auto
Sim.
means, you know, it implies
Yeah.
like a self, like in sim is like a togethering.
Symbiosis. There might be a word simple in symbiosis. Simply
Mhm.
symbiosis. And
Yeah.
you talked about we're becoming together.
Yeah.
Is there a sense of what we're becoming together?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, you know, it's like with any of these beautiful questions, you know, it really depends on which perspective we want to look through. Um, you know, one way to look at it is that um, there isn't a what, there's a question mark, you know, and there's a sensation that there's a cosmos that is becoming together, and it's been becoming together for, you know, billions upon billions of years. And I think it's so fat, this cosmos. It's so juicy that to define, to confine a what um, too closely, um, it starts to put constraints on something that's infinite. Um, I feel like I just need to say that in order to say any particulars that we might explore together, because we certainly are becoming something. Um, and we're not becoming something. What we're becoming is not uh, um, bound by the marching of linear time. And by that, what I mean is we have the history and the future. It's all here together. If, for example, we have an adult who's let's say a parent, and they have grown to a certain set of capacities, and then we have a child who's grown to an earlier set of capacities, that child, like they're both becoming with, but they're not becoming exactly the same thing individually. collectively it's still a cosmos that is, giggling its way awake and giggling its way fat, getting juicy and getting tall and growing down and all these sort of things. But it's not like we're all at the same place at the same time. We have to kind of let go of some of that time linearity, that there's multiple dimensions that are becoming together in various different ways. I mean, I was in the car with my daughter yesterday, and she's 14, 13. She's a teenager. It's too blurry to even know anymore, but she's very, very much a teenager. And she was smiling at me, and she was like, she wanted me to, well, I'll tell you. So she's like, I was learning about all of these amazing things that I can do to make my hair amazing. She's like, I can do this double shampoo wash, and then I can do like this, like other kind of hair treatment, and then I can get this like uh this machine. I don't know what it is, but I imagine it as some sort of like a misting, gusting object. I have no idea what it really is. And then she looks at me and smiles and said, Dad, would you be willing to help me realize this? Would you be willing to help me fulfill this? And so we're becoming together, just as like you're becoming with your dinner. But it's hard to define the what
Mhm.
when we get into the weeds of it, because there's so many whats. This
Mhm.
gets us into those world bubbles. But if we step back and we see a whole cosmos that's pulsing and breathing and that's growing, it accounts for all of these different nested territories that are awakening to something beautiful.
Mhm.
Like, how do I make my hair amazing? But also, that moment was filled with playfulness and intimacy,
Mhm.
with another human being. And so we can see in that we have all these different ways that people make meaning, and some of them are holding sort of earlier iterations cosmically of how humans have made meaning, for example, and some people are holding later iterations. But if we step away from like developmentally, where am I at and where are you at? It's a whole cosmos interacting with itself and becoming with itself together in a sort of myriad ways.
Hmm. Yeah, it feels really sweet to receive and hear more about. Just, I love when you share what's happening in your relationship with your daughter. Every time you share a story, I really light up. So I'm grateful for you bringing that here.
Yeah, because I do that in part, aside from the fact that, I love her and she's a part of my daily experience. But I just, for our listeners, it's like the kinds of things we're exploring here. To me, these aren't ideas. I mean, we can look at them as ideas, but to me, if it's not, Jeremy Johnson said we need maps that crawl.
Mm,
What would it mean to
mm,
have a map that crawls? And to me, part of that means that our maps have to come off the page, and they have to uh, it's like we have to jump out of the book and like into our breakfast, in order for this. And so even as I might be talking about some of these things that could sound, I don't know if they sound abstract, I could imagine they could, but I'm talking about eating toast and like, making waffles and um, becoming with the world um, in a very juicy, full-bodied, present way. Um, so I just like to make sure that that's, invoked here,
mm.
so that like our initial invitation, like the idea would be that we would be moved in our experience so that we'd hug the world a little bit more closely, a little bit more intimately. and not just think about it more profoundly.
Yeah, so we can make this a explicit invitation for us together and also for everyone listening in this moment. If, invitations given with freedom, if you'd like to, you can, in whatever way feels good for you, just hug the world a little bit more closely.
Yeah.
As I lean into this gesture of hugging the world a little more closely, there's the words that come to me are just unfathomable vastness of it all.
Mhm.
Whew, whoo-wee. A lot here.
Yes, this cosmos is fat.
Like the ultimate anti-shaming campaign. We're just a big fat cosmos together.
That's right. And by fat, I mean juicy, like mangoes, it's like they got nectar in them, and
Yeah.
and there's a lot going on in a mango. There's a lot there, and to me, um, one of the things that I sense is profoundly missing in modernity's sort of ache is this capacity for profoundly close intimacy in relationship with our experience. With the gift of reason comes the pain of distance, and it's something that I feel is very prevalent. I'm using the word modernity, and I don't just mean that people that are sort of making meaning through one particular lens will be afflicted by this. Modernity is a period of many moments that envelops all of us at multiple sort of envelops all of us. And so, it's like what does it take to be so close to that mango that we become re-enchanted? Because to me there's a sense that when we lack depth, when we lack the capacity to experience life with depth, we become disenchanted. Things become more like dry cardboard, like licking cardboard, and it starts to take on the mood of an era and the mood of its people, and that would also be another explicit invitation. How close, I mean, it's part of hugging the world, but another way to say it, how deeply can we experience that? I mean, mangoes giggle when they roar, and it doesn't have to happen sort of so far away from us that we forget, and we think that it's just dinner time and got to get it over with, that there's something happening here. And the thing I love about depth is that if we're looking at, we've been sort of implicitly referencing stages of development and things like that, but anybody can cultivate a depth experience.
Mhm.
And so it opens up a dimension of freedom and capacity for practice for us to, hear that giggling.
It's a heck of a quote. Mangoes giggle when they roar. That's as far as I'm aware, it's the first time I've heard that one.
So maybe that's the answer to one of your first questions. What's the sentence from my book?
Yeah,
I actually, that sentence isn't quite in there. It's going to have to make it in there now.
yeah.
But it's that kind of language that this book is uh, emulating. because I love smart people, but I have a very difficult time reading their papers.
Yeah.
And it's never a reflection of the ideas in the papers. I think honestly, a lot of it has to do with that I'm not the person who's dyslexic that like says they're dyslexic because they got confused for a moment. Like I was died like it was like it's like a real deal. Like I went to
Hmm.
like a special school and like
Hmm.
it's my relationship to reading is like if it doesn't wake up
Yeah.
something in me,
Yeah.
it's really hard for me. And
Hmm.
so mangoes giggle when they roar. Um, that's the kind of qualities of language that I like to play with as a writer to awaken the reader so that they're like shocked out of reading about ideas and into being a giggling, roaring mango and saying, holy shit, I think I'm a giggling, roaring mango reading a book. Like that's a different way of becoming
Yeah.
with, a crawling map.
The word that just keeps pinging me, I use the word dehydrated all the time. Like when there's
Mhm.
just dehydrated constructs, dehydrated language, it's like, where's the juice? Where's the zest? Where's the mango juice in there? And it's so deeply resonant. If it's you, I can look at a book or look at a paper and see if it's got if the mango's giggling and roaring in there. I mean, you can feel it palpably. And
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we all can do that. I don't mean to make it sound like I'm the only one, but um, there definitely is a lack of interest in what in I'm trying to make a in the juice that doesn't have a squeeze joke or something like that, but in the I'm definitely looking for the fat, plump, juicy mangoes. That's the
Because I think that gets us closer to wholeness.
yeah.
And I mean it brings us into all sorts of stuff. Like we're being playful with mangoes, but like if we take this to from human to human contact, if I'm able to be that intimate with an experience of eating a mango, but I bring that then to, being in relationship to a human being, it's going to be very difficult for me to not feel your pain when you're having it because I'm practicing a kind of intimacy of a kind of closeness where my senses are included as a conscious part of how I'm knowing someone. And so if I enter a situation where there's disagreement, maybe we really disagree. Maybe it's like a political divisive something or other. But if I'm practiced at being close with life rather than distancing myself from it, I may start to feel that there's other things underneath our ideas about what's true. And then I might start noticing because as we go through layers of depth, I like to think of it in terms of an avocado. Actually, a mango would be a perfect analogy too. But there's like skin, there's then the mushy stuff you eat, and then there's the seed. And as we go through, and then of course there's the fourth layer, which isn't a layer, and it's the enlivening animation that's throughout the whole thing. But as we get closer to the seed, we start feeling that things are more essential. We kind of get underneath. And when we do that, there can be a connection to, oh, we disagree on the surface, but we both want what's best for children. We both want what's best for fill in the blank. And so I think that there's in that intimacy and in that sensory awareness, there's an ability to start again seeing how we are a continuity stream, even if it's in the form of, well, we disagree, but we are aligned. We are aligned in that we want to help our families thrive. But what we disagree on are all of the details. That's a very different starting point for a conversation that is embracing an essential dimension, a seed dimension. It's also beginning a process of including us rather than a me and an it. And so I think this sort of playing with the aliveness and juiciness of tasting life, it becomes very practical in terms of how do we stop warfare? How do we stop destroying each other? When we get close enough and we feel the pain of each other, we're starting to destroy ourselves, and we feel it even if we don't have the words for it.
Yeah, it's made me wonder in a practical sense, like in the sense of the evolution of humanity and what's happening on the planet right now. I keep intuiting more and more there's got to be this like global forgiveness and acceptance party where there's a big planetary unconditional loving witness that's present with our species while we grieve and go through the pain of just realizing the history that we've all grown through together to get to here.
Yeah, it's all living in us, and we've all done this to each other, whatever the it is, whether it's ecstasy and communion, and whether it's all the horrors. And I agree that this comes back to the question around what are some of the features of wholeness. I think that's what we need more of, whether it's just simple human kindness, decency, holding people with dignity, to a recognition that there are no bad parts, to a recognition that everybody's living in their own world, and that world is very real to them and deserves, we might call it developmental rights applied to a million world bubbles, to there's only one thing happening. And that one thing has its human heart, and it also has its bleeding wounds. And however we're orienting to wholeness, it feels to me like the antidote. It's what starts to stop the bleeding, because wholeness is in a posture of curiosity, which implies that it's in a posture of listening. If you're truly authentically curious, you're listening. In Chinese medicine, they have they talk about the portals in the head, the eyes, the ears, the nose, all that, as the seven portals of the heart. And they think of it as like windows to the heart, that it's through the senses that the heart is able to receive the world, and it's through the heart, that the heart, from the heart through the senses, the world receives you. And so when we're in a place of curiosity, there's a way in which our portals, our sensory portals, they soften and widen, they become a well. The ears become a well, the eyes become a drinking in of the world. And I think that when we do that, there's a point right next to the ear, an acupuncture point right next to the ear called listening palace. And it has a direct relationship to the heart. The idea is that like there's something like the capacity for an ear to hear sound is different than the heart's capacity to use the ear to listen. That the eyes can concretely see stuff, but for the eyes to truly be able to see is a whole nother thing. And that I think that that's what wholeness helps provide for us. It opens these portals just long enough that our fixed perspectives can just recede a little bit, long enough to hear something new. It's like one of my herb teacher, Thea Elijah, she would talk about how like people have like it's like they have a triangle on their forehead, but everybody's like tossing circles at them. And so like it just bounces right off the forehead instead of opening those portals. Maybe this person is saying something I've never thought of before. Not do I agree or disagree. Maybe there's a third option, that there's something entirely new that we can't hear if our portals of our heart are kind of structured in such a way that, it's like every new idea, it just seems like a circle that's trying to like go and fit into a triangle shape.
Mm. Yeah, and there's the experience for me lately is the words are backgrounded and the energy they're sourced from and infused with is foregrounded. And I even notice subtle ways that I will create a triangle of receptivity to a certain kind of energy.
Mhm.
Uh, like I really only want to let this in or receive this if it is juicy, if it is a big fat juicy mango. But if it
That's
feels
right.
dehydrated and boring, then I don't
Right.
know. I don't know about that.
That's right. Then we're one step away from wholeness again.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean we can't make choices and that we can't set boundaries and decide like, yeah, I'd rather like play with a frisbee than like lick cardboard. Like it, but what I hear in what you're saying is that self-reflective noticing when there are allergies
Mhm.
or subtle allergies or subtle addictions. And I don't mean addictions in this way in like the sort of typical sense, although it could mean that too when it's in its extreme, but just those little tendencies towards, oh, I don't like that, I don't want that, and I do want this. And it's not to say we shouldn't be able to have those things or that there's some ideal where that stops happening. I mean, spiritual paths will tell us what they think ideals are. And so I'm not wanting to make it seem like that. We can do whatever we want and enjoy the way we want to enjoy, but there is a way in which I think we can discover those allergies and addictions in us and embrace them in such a way that there's no longer a charge, and
Mm,
then go about making choices
mm,
based on who we are. And like, I'm a, a I grew up in a family of beatnik artist, poet people. So like my orientation is going to be that way. Whereas some other folks, they can be with, like we were talking about, these kind of papers that are hard for me as a recovering dyslexic person to read, that they'll be able to read them and really understand them. And you know we need that too,
mhm,
because they might be able to translate for me.
mhm,
It's like for me with Jeremy Johnson, I mentioned him a couple of times. It's like when I read Gepser, I, it's very hard for me to understand the words, but when I hear Jeremy translate in his words Gepser, I'm like, thank you for giving me access to this, because
mm,
I've got that kind of, they didn't have this when I was a kid, but they didn't have a name for this when I was a kid, but nowadays that you can be dyslexic with words and you can be dyslexic with math. And I'm more of the dyslexic with math. And so if I read something where the ideas sound like math, there's a place in me that um, it wants to cry a little bit, like looking at a spreadsheet or looking at a plaid shirt that makes me dizzy. And so it's like, I just want to make clear to our listeners, like, I'm not trying to say, hey, we should only like juicy, artful stuff.
mm,
But can we be in what it is that we're drawn to and feel good about doing, which might include reading these really technical papers? Can we do that with fullness and life? Because then I think it allows us to really take it in so deeply and fully. And then for someone like me who can't read, who can't understand certain things through reading, um, we can be translators because we touched it. It wasn't just the ideas that we were comprehending, but we touched it because we were intimate with it.
Hmm.
And so then they kind of all come together.
Hmm.
Yeah.
As you're speaking, I'm really, really appreciating your continuing to name the listeners. And
Mhm.
there's just a continual feeling for me of welcoming,
Yeah.
welcoming the listeners into the space, welcoming the listeners into space, acknowledging the listeners. And then when you said we can be the translators, there was this jump in me of, um, what is it we could be the translators of for the
Mhm.
listeners right now?
That's a great question. I mean, if I look back on our conversation so far, I think we're talking about intimacy with life and how intimacy with life gets us in touch with qualities of wholeness and togethering and a willingness to embrace all things, which doesn't mean agree or not set boundaries. It's like if someone does something horrible, we have a legal system that like helps keep everybody safe. So it's not saying everything goes, but that there's an invitation to find the places in us that are uh, allergic to the world
Hmm.
and to explore how those allergies are not out there in the world. I mean, they are, but they're also inside of you and I. And that if I can embrace those allergies, I'll be able to embrace those allergies in others.
Hmm.
I'll be able to embrace those same territories in others. Um, if I can embrace anger in me, I can see it in someone else and I can embrace it in them. It doesn't mean I don't set a clear boundary and say, you're not allowed to talk to me like that.
Hmm.
But the difference is the trigger is taken out.
Hmm.
And with the trigger taken out, it means I can come from wholeness more easily and I can love you more easily while saying, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to call me again
Hmm.
unless you're able to speak to me in a different way.
And I've heard you name embracing our allergies a couple of times. So I'm curious practically, tell us about how you practice embracing your allergies.
Yeah, so usually it starts with with a sense of a trigger. And so maybe um I notice that somebody appears annoying to me. And so then I might ask myself, well, okay, well, what about them is annoying? Oh, well, I don't like the way that they are so like self-righteous. Okay, well, what what else is going on without self-righteousness? Well, it's like they just think that it's like a my dad's girlfriend years ago, she'd be like, you think your shit don't stink, and it's like, oh, I don't like that they think their shit doesn't stink, man. They think that they're like above everybody. And so first this is the easiest part, right? Because it's easy to keep looking outside of myself. And so sometimes it can be helpful to dwell there a little bit and just internally, just kind of like maybe write it down like, okay, like what are all the things about this person that suck that I really don't like? And then that's going to be a direct invitation now for me to look inside myself. And okay, well, where do I think that where do I act self-righteous in my life? Where in me is the sense that my shit don't stink? Now it gets really juicy if the first answer is, oh no, that's not me. I don't have that in me. That's like a ding, 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 ding to letting us know that oh, you are repressing a part of yourself. So that can be like a difficult moment. And then that would be followed by anchoring in wholeness as the starting point. So asking myself, okay, how do I feel towards uh, self-righteousness? How do I feel towards the idea in me that I am self-righteous? Oh, I don't like that. That makes me really mad. Okay, well, would the part of me that doesn't like self-righteousness be willing to step aside for just a moment? Because if I look at self-righteousness and I don't like it, that's a part that I'm fused with. Because wholeness loves everything while still setting boundaries if that needs to be. So I asked myself, okay, how do I feel towards self-righteous? Well, I feel really angry. I hate it. Okay, well, the part that feels angry and hates it, step aside. I don't want you to go away, but would you just unblend and step next to? And you say, oh, okay. And then I ask again, and you say, well, how do I feel towards self-righteous now? Well, now I feel really sad. Oh, well, would the sad part of me be willing to just unblend and step aside? I want you to be here, but would you just go ahead and step aside? Okay, sure. And then I ask a third time, now how do I feel towards self-righteousness? I feel curious. I feel interested. I wonder about this now. I wonder about this in me. Maybe this is some part of me. So what we did here is we established wholeness as the starting point. We don't just, I don't just invite people to interact with parts willy-nilly. Because very often what happens is it ends up being a part that's taking over as the person's I is interacting with another part. And that at worst doesn't go well at all. At best, not much moves. And so I want to establish wholeness as a beginning point. And then from there, we just begin relationship. So we go from fusion to differentiation. So we help all the parts differentiate from wholeness that we're taking over. And then I can turn towards that self-righteousness and I just start a relationship from wholeness. Oh, tell me more about yourself. What's most important to you? Because wholeness sees potentials in people. It sees the seed. It projects that there's a seed of possibility and goodness in any part. So from wholeness, it's naturally going to be noticing those good intentions, something I know, internal family systems focuses on, and something that Kim Barta focuses on, and something that I know you focus on and I focus on. This is a feature of wholeness, to see that there's something good underneath the bad behavior or whatever kind of behavior, however we want to judge it. And so that would be the practical thing. Of course, there's like a lot more that we could go into if we go deeply into parts work and all the different possibilities. But just from a very simple perspective, start with wholeness. Like first look out at the world, see the thing that you don't like, define it, try to find it in yourself, then anchor in wholeness and build a relationship with it from wholeness. Noticing that in like 30 seconds, another part might jump in and start saying, oh yeah, I think it's time for you to change. I'll even hear it in a single sentence. Someone will anchor in wholeness. They'll look at the self-righteousness and they'll say, gosh, I really see how your intentions are good, but you're really going to need to change right now. And in that moment, we had wholeness speaking, and then we had a part come in and finish with but. And so we become part detectors. Mm-hmm. This is something that I think is much less explored in the shadow work culture in general. And I say this because I'll see people that are telling me they're doing shadow work all the time. And then in one conversation, like 8 parts take over in like a paragraph, and they don't know it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great if we're doing shadow work on the meditation cushion. I'm sure the room feels luminous. But what happens when we go out and drive our car and have to interact with other human beings who like vote very differently than we do? Like, we need to take this out of our luminous room and are like, oh, I'm like welcoming all the parts. We need to be able to do this out in the world. And this is a simple way to do that. Ask the parts to step aside, anchor in wholeness, and then build a relationship with all those parts.
And I'm imagining then, and I mean, you're sharing this as a personal process. Obviously, this is what you take clients through as well. But then there's also the parts that were they are blended into wholeness that I imagine you may come to next. Is that true?
That's right. Yeah. So the idea is you choose whatever target parts you want. So maybe we start with the self-righteousness because that was the thing. But then maybe that sad part is not feeling okay. And maybe they had a really hard time on blending. And you realize, oh, I need to kind of shift my attention to be with this other part for a while.
Mm.
And another way to look at it is you don't have to prioritize at all. Find any parts that you find, any parts that are blending that you're asking to unblend, any parts that aren't blended that are just showing up. Anchor in wholeness and build relationships with everybody. What this does is it begins to create over time, it creates trust in the internal system, which makes doing deeper work much easier. Sometimes I'll have clients, not always, but sometimes I'll have clients come in and we'll try to go in and do some parts work. And their inner system is so distrusting. They don't even know that wholeness is there.
Mhm.
And you'll know this because you'll ask a part, how old do you think this person is? And they'll say, oh, they're 5. And so you now have a part that thinks that the owner, the sheriff, is a 5-year-old instead of recognizing that it's a limitless well of virtue. And so it becomes really difficult to, you have all these protective mechanisms that parts are taking on, not really letting the process move deeper.
Mhm.
And in those cases, I don't try to have the process move deeper.
Mhm.
What I do is as I back up, rather than let's work on this thing you just came in with, and let's work with the part that's doing that thing and all that stuff, backing up and saying, okay, let's just practice anchoring in wholeness, or that unconditionally loving witness was a word that you use. I know Kim Barta uses that word a lot. It's the same idea. And from that place, building friendship with any parts you find. It doesn't necessarily lead to immediate resolution of an issue, but it creates internal trust, and it starts to prepare the person to be able to prioritize wholeness when there's a lot of parts involved. In time, the whole system settles, trust develops, so that when you ask a part, hey, will you let us work here with something that's kind of painful? They'll say, okay, I'd love to. I trust you now. I'll step out of the way. And then we can start going into much deeper territories, not into the shadows that we see, which aren't really the shadows, but we get to go into the shadows that we really don't see, the ones that are completely invisible to consciousness.
As you say that, there's a it it feels like the back of my awareness kind of sinking down into mm, unawareness. I don't know if that
Mm-hmm.
lands, but yeah. If there's a front and do you experience a front and a back of awareness?
I mean, I think one can. Again, it's like, um, I mean, it's a funny question. I love the question. Uh, from one way to look at it is that awareness is perfectly empty, so it doesn't have spatial contours. But um, certainly, I think we can orient um, to things in terms of
Hmm.
the spatial dimensions of space.
So maybe when, because I saw when you were talking about awareness going into the shadow, like shadow meaning unconscious, what we're really not aware of, not just a
Right.
trigger, or not just not just a part that feels frustrated, but something that's completely out of awareness.
Mhm.
Can you say more about the relationship between awareness and unawareness?
Sure. Well, it seems to me that awareness itself is something that is ever present, and it's even weird to say it's wholly awake because it implies that it's in time and could be asleep. But I think it's a place where we start to fail with words, but that there's a sense of an ever present awakeness. And with that said, the human mind is able to wall things off from an ever present awakeness. So that then, when that ever present awakeness is moving through a human conscious mind, there are things that it does not see. And so, to me, shadow work is a territory where we can begin to invite these hidden pockets of history. That it wasn't that it was too much for awareness to bear, because awareness doesn't have to bear. The only thing that is ever bared is inside time and space. And awareness is beyond that. It's timeless. It's spaceless. But the human psyche grows mechanisms to limit sensations that feel too great to bear, to try to protect us. And so those mechanisms will wall things off so that the ever-present awakeness doesn't have access to it through that particular mind. Why? Because that human being has parts that are creating dividing lines in fullness and hiding things from consciousness. And this is a good thing. This is a really good thing. We want repression if that's the only option to total annihilation. I mean, human beings experience things that are unthinkable. You know, I mean, if you work with, for those of you that work with people one-on-one, you know this, or you just read the news and you can find this. I mean, I'll have clients come in and share things with me. I couldn't have conceived, if you said create the worst possible scenario, I wouldn't even have come close to some of the things that people go through. So we want our psyche to wall these things off, and they're like pockets of living history in the present. So there's no past except maybe in a fleeting memory, and even that, it's still happening in the present. But so you have these hidden pockets in the present that they include a world and a whole series of parts that are in that world. So it's not just like my inner child got sad, right? There's an inner child part that's in a world that's varying degrees of scary, except for the plant they didn't notice that was just sort of like benevolent and not, just kind of sitting there. There's a whole world that they're in. And then there's how the person has internalized the collective that caused the pain. Mm-hmm. So inside of that world, there's also the parent that was distant and the other parent that was aggressive. These are not mom and dad. These are the way that individual psyche has absorbed the world. And that includes absorbing the burdens of the mom and dad, the negative behaviors of the mom and dad, but also the deeper essential nature of mom and dad. And really, these are all parts of the self. Now, the thing to be clear about here is that although we have internalized mom and dad, and so when we look inside and we see, oh, we look inside this hidden world and we see, oh, there's my mom and there's my dad, that's really a part of the person. But what may not belong any longer are the burdens and the pain that those parts are holding. And so in shadow work, one of the things we do is we help it all unburden. And I like to do this together. So the part that was hurt and the part that looks like mom and the part that looks like dad, they're all there together in that world. We take the world out, we sort of move the world out of hiding. And then all together they can release. We might call it, some traditions call it introjects. Some traditions might talk about them as burdens. It can be emotions that sort of need to be processed or need to be released. We let it all go. And then the only thing is left is the essential nature of the part of you that looks like your mother, and the part of you that looks like your father, and the part of you that looks like your little child version of you. And then all of those parts can commune. Because we would say, I was brought up Jewish, the mishigas, the schmutz, the stuff, all that's been liberated. Now you just have different parts of this subtle collective, we might call it, that can now engage in union. Because really your mom and dad, they were really holding an essence of the collective anyway. And then we just took that in, but we also took in some of the junk. So we can release all that. And then what happens when people do this is they, instead of just their part feeling healed, there's a lot of opportunity for the part feeling healed in relationship to what they're becoming with, the sympoiesis. They start to come to experiences of understanding that they didn't have about the goodness of why their parents did what they did. And so I see a lot of really touching moments where parts are communing with parts that look like the abusers or the people that caused harm. And that's where the forgiveness starts to come in. Yeah.
There's just some more questions kind of coming up to continue asking you, but I also just want to speak to the burdens, or you mentioned they could be called burdens or introjects or psychic energy that wants to be let go of, however we want to name the ineffable, as you said. uh I just want to name, you and I got to co-facilitate at a retreat in Utah a few months ago, and there was one moment where the two of us got to facilitate for someone, and of course that's all confidential, and I'm not going to go into any of that at all. But I just want to name how deeply impacted I've been getting to see you in action, working and seeing the way that you do bring the whole system, the whole collective into the process of doing shadow work and parts work in the way that you do. It's had an impact on whatever forest is, like my being, my person, my consciousness, but also the practice and the way that I see the world and work with clients. So I want to just thank you and share some appreciation with you for the way that you're facilitating, that I've seen modeled and gotten to be a part of with you, and also the way that you're articulating the way that you work with folks is really having an impact for me in real time.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, for me, it's important that the shadow work that I share with the world or facilitate with folks, that there is an implicit invitation towards recognizing that whatever is happening in me is also happening in you. Now, we know if for the listeners that are familiar with developmental sort of waves of perspective taking and so on, we know that not everybody is going to immediately look out there and then see something and then immediately see that that's also in here. So that's not exactly what I'm pointing to. I'm interested in shadow work and parts work practices that people will do way earlier than that sort of realization starts happening, beginning to seed the possibility for that to happen much more smoothly. And so I find that a lot of parts work traditions will focus on the parts that look like me, and everything else is other. And there's a lot of beautiful healing that happens with that. But when we start looking at the parts that look like my mother, the parts that look like the abuser, are also part of the subtle collective, and they're also part of me.
Mhm.
With the caveat, the very important caveat, that when we go through a healing process, all of those burdens are released. If we do that part, if we let those burdens be released from the part that looks like the abuser and the part that looks like me, what we get are essential nodes of light. And so it becomes safe, because we're not leaving the person with this idea of, now I've taken in the abuser with all of their pain and all of the harm they've caused me and all of the introjects, and now I'm just owning that as myself. That is not what I'm pointing to. I'm pointing to that all of that stuff, that those introjects are not only held by the part that looks like you, but the abuser is holding their own introjects and their own distortions. So you've internalized all of that. It's not just the gunk that they sent towards you during the abuse. You've actually taken in this whole person, much more of their history than just that exchange that happened when they sent introjects in you. So in this process, what we do is we're liberating the whole thing from all of the parts. And then it creates a different relationship, so that now I can start to see what becoming with is about. Because now I realize, oh, the abuser is in me, and I've helped heal the difficult stuff. You're not healing the abuser. Sometimes people don't want to do that, and that's valid. They're like, no, that person hurt me like way over there. That's fine, but you've internalized them, so they're here. So we got to deal with that. And then as that releases, now there's room to really start paving the way for a robust, subtle collective that later on can become a sense of unification with.
Tell me more about this last gesture you're doing as you're speaking about a unification with. What is the?
Yeah. So this gesture, in Terry O'Fallon's stages model, she uses the word interpenetration. I love that word, and I include that as a part of those particular stages that have that gesture within them. But I also like the word interreflection, because interreflection means that when I look at you, I see a mirror. Subtle interreflection means I look at you, I look into your heart, and I see a mirror of myself. And then you look into my heart and you see a mirror of yourself. And what it's like is it's a kind of unification where I do recognize that Forrest is over there. And Forrest does recognize that Alexander is over here. It's not like a non-dual unity where there's a collapse of subject and object, but there's a stable, structured state. Maybe structured might not be the perfect word right there, but it's stable. And it works with mirrors, where I can see over there and see upon reflection, I see that I am you, and you see that you are me. And so that's what that gesture was pointing to.
And just for anyone who's audio only, Alexander's got his fingertips or the tops of his fingers touching, with one hand thumb up, one hand thumb down, and just flipping those back and forth. It's almost like giving a high five and
Yeah. It's giving a high five to yourself. And from a subtle perspective, that's exactly what it is. It's
yeah.
just a high five to you. It's just interreflection subtly is a high five to yourself, like an hour after the encounter.
So I guess we have concrete high fives that happen in real time, subtle high fives that happen an hour later, and then metaware high fives that happen in real time again.
Well, so we have like, yeah, so I probably shouldn't take what you said seriously and go into details, should I? But just to finish the thought, I mean, in the concrete, you'll look out and you'll see someone's rules and belief structures. And you'll notice that everybody's eating tofu because that's how you get liberated from the wheel of, transmigration of the soul, for example. And so you notice everybody has the certain rules and everybody's eating tofu and nobody's eating beef. And then upon reflection, you realize, oh, like I'm wearing the same t-shirt. I believe in reincarnation and I too am eating tofu. And so you have that concrete interreflection. And then subtly, it happens with, I notice the person at the dinner table is being self-righteous, and I recognize that there's a part of themselves that's totally taking over God, that self-righteous part just keeps taking over wholeness, man. And then an hour later, I realize, oh, look, the whole time that I was judging them, a self-righteous part was taking me over and judging them. And then, in the metaware, there's a recognition of the entire cosmos as a living, breathing, nested unfolding, where matter, life, and mind is all pulsing together as a living, breathing history that goes all the way up and all the way down. And then there's a recognition that upon reflection, oh, I think shit, that's happening here too. And then there's some sort of like an invisibilizing, where there's only a cosmos unfolding. And so it's the same gesture, it's interreflection or interpenetration. The thing is interpenetration for me, it is part of those stages, but it's more like two clouds passing through one another. There's a penetrative dimension, and that's a part of it. It's a part of what happens when reciprocity starts to become stable. It's just at the culmination point of interpenetration, I experience it as something that feels more stable than how I relate to the word penetrating. So while I completely agree that interpenetrative is part of those particular stages, their full maturity feels like two mirrors that see each other upon reflection. The cosmos is over there and I'm over here. It's not non-dual collapse.
Yeah, there's a click that
And I
happens.
realize that I am that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is me.
Interfastening.
Interfacening.
Or cohering, like when you what's it called when you have two pieces of metal and you melt them together? Like an interwelding maybe.
Yeah, it's just that in that welding, there's two little mirrors that are in there. So they're not completely merged. They're a stable state, but they're mirrors across from each other so they can see. I can see the cosmos. I can see the self-righteousness. I can see the sad tofu unflavored on the plate, like saving me from, the transmigration of the soul. I can see all of those things outside of myself. I'm not glued to them. I can see them, but then I see them in me. And so it is a welding, but as long as in between that weld, there's two little mirrors that's keeping it. It's different than like as that matures, a total non-duality.
As that matures, a total non-duality. Okay.
Where there isn't subject or object. I mean, you'll see this, for example, I don't want it to sound too abstract. You'll see this, for example, like in the subtle, a subtle stage of development where people will see projections on reflection, like I was describing. It's like a high five with the arrogance or the self-righteousness, and then later I realize that's me. Whereas then we see that the next stage after that can do that in the moment. So they'll judge the person and then they'll instantly see that they are that too. That's, I don't mean non-dual in like necessarily the biggest spiritual sense. I mean it like that, where it's like there is no reflective moment. We are, I am you and you are me now, as soon as, and so it shifts from stable state mirroring to I am that now.
Yeah, it's a powerful interrelational question. What are we mirroring for each other in this moment?
And how do we love whatever it is we find there for the sake of each other?
Hmm. Feel like the subtle shift in energy, like maybe there's a culminating into a bit of a pause.
Yeah.
Does that feel true for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feels like we've covered a lot in a little bit of time.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to share some appreciation with you if you're open for it. And before I do that, I'd love to just see if there's anything else you'd want to share before
Yeah.
transitioning.
Well, just to come back to the beginning, we explored a number of different things. I suspect different things will touch different people in various ways, and some things might just sound like a drunk fortune cookie thing, and some of it might really relate to how we could be with ourselves in a new way. And to me, the invitation is that all of it is part of wholeness, and I just want to come back to that intimacy with life, and that whatever it is we're in contact with, we can become really close with that. Whether it's, the friendship of two 13-year-olds or these other domains of shadow work or the cosmos. It doesn't matter what it is, but whatever the it is, we can become closer, and we can connect with a kind of love that knows no bounds. And I just really feel that we need those loving arms to bring around one another, because our minds don't always agree, and that there's an antidote for war. And, and I don't think we can wait for other people to do that. I think we have to be the people that do that, and that learn how to do that, and learn how to invite these parts to be in relationship with us rather than taking us over, so that we can continue our adventure into wholeness.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, to me, it feels like there's a invitation in that for all of the listeners here and everyone in the field to say yes to the journey into wholeness together,
Yeah.
and to be the antidote to war, to be, to walk through the world from wholeness together.
And when we screw it up, we have each other to hold us, because we're going to screw it up.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Like 8 times between, like, 3 traffic lights, and it's like, and I'm being silly by saying screw it up. Like, it's not always so drastic, but like parts are going to take over all the time, until we've practiced a lot, and even then they still do. But really, I was being a little silly in my language, but really what I mean is giving each other some room to do our best, and to screw it up, and to show up, and to mess up, and um, to come from wholeness, and then to come from something else that feels ouchy, and to give each other some breathing space to make mistakes and then practice again. Because I think that it's like, if we don't give each other room, a place to practice, and we just expect it to be like the best possible outcome all the time, we're not going to have any place to practice. So then we won't get good at it. We'll just get better at being annoyed at each other for not being in wholeness. They're like, dude, I think that's not the point either.
I could offer a training in that, but that's not the way I'm wanting to make money right now. It's like, well, anyway, I could make a lot of jokes about that, but I'll just leave it. Um, yeah, perfect. So appreciations, you're open to receive some? Yeah, okay. Hmm. Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you, Alexander. Meeting you has been a total treasure for me. I feel incredibly inspired by you, and I experience you as such a friend, um, almost instantaneously. Getting to hang out with you, I feel more at home in myself, feel more free to just be and, um, yeah, float through life less inhibited, being in your presence. I've really enjoyed connecting, and the conversations we've had, the work we've already gotten to do together is so juicy for me. And in so many ways, I feel like we're just getting started. So I just want to, yeah, tell you how grateful I am for you being available for this call and to do this recording together, and the unfathomable amount of wisdom that you've shared from the experience you've had in your personal life and also your work as a practitioner. It is such an honor and a treat to get to be with you and receive this myself, and I feel tremendously grateful I get to share it with a larger audience. So um, thank you so much, for being you. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Forrest. I really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you for inviting me here to be in dialogue. And I love your openness and interest and willingness to just drop right into the center of things, and playfully explore what arises, no matter which path it takes. Um, yeah, I really feel your love, and your goodness, and yeah, thank you for bringing that here, and for inviting me into um, this exploration.
Yeah, more to come. We'll
More to come.
definitely do this again.
Yeah, sounds good.